Hello guys, welcome back to the Digital Aviator channel and to the second to last part of my Microsoft Flight Simulator tutorial. And in this video we are going to talk about landing the plane. Now the first step in order to land the plane is to, well, go to an airport. So maybe you've gotten lost by now if you have been following me along in this tutorial. If you are, don't feel too bad, just reload the simulator, press escape, go back to the main menu, select your airport again you want to land at, take off from there, fly around, and then make sure you don't get lost again. But that's of course the first step. You need to know where to go to the airport. So I can see the flashing runway lights over there of the airport, so I'm going in the right direction. So that's the first step. Next is know what runway to take. Now I can talk about charts where you can find diagrams of which runways there are. That's not a lot of fun right now. Let's keep it very basic. We'll just land on the same runway we took off from. So make sure you understand or you remember the number of the runway you took off from. So here at my home airport Eelde, I took off from runway 23. Might have been different if you have been flying from a different airport. So the runway 23, let's say I want to land on that same runway again. That means that that side of the runway we took off from points towards 230 degrees. So if I look at the airfield right now, so I can see there's a runway that actually goes pretty much straight ahead. So maybe that's runway 23, but I'm going to look at my instruments, heading indicator, and I can see 23 is pointing to behind me. So this is actually the opposite side of the runway. This is actually runway 05, which is half a circle, 180 degrees offset from runway 23. So that's not the side of the runway I want. Maybe I could actually land on there, but let's just keep the challenge for ourselves to land on the same runway we took off from. So runway 23. So that means I first have to fly around the airfield and then approach the airfield from the other side. So that is what you kind of need to keep in mind. Where is the airfield and are you at a correct angle towards the airfield to land? Are you going to land on the right runway? What direction is that runway going to face? So I want to fly around the airfield and then come in on a straight line towards the runway and then descend towards the runway on that line. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm just going to pause the video to get a bit closer to the airfield before I continue. Otherwise I'll be sitting here for 5 minutes waiting until I get close to the airfield. So I'll be right back. Alright, so welcome back. I flew a little bit further. The airfield is now on my right. So this will be runway 05. I'm still flying in the same direction. And this will be runway 23. So I want to fly a little bit further, make a turn to the right, and then approach the runway on this line. So I knew that of course by looking at my heading indicator. 23 is pointing to my back. So that means we want to land the runway in the opposite direction I'm flying right now. So on this side of the runway in this direction. So now let's talk about the whole landing phase of the flight. Every flight ends with a landing or with a crash if you don't land correctly. So it is important to prepare for landing and to just understand what we need to do during the landing. Now the landing, I must say, is the most difficult part during the flight. So don't feel too worried about messing it up. It's a simulator. In the real world you have an instructor who can take over the plane for you. So don't feel you need to do it all on your own for your first couple of landings. It will get better as you practice. Actually for me the first couple of landings were horrible. But I've probably done hundreds of landings in a simulator right now. And I feel pretty good at it. But it's, just don't feel too bad if you mess it up. That's the main thing. But we can at least prepare by thinking about the steps we need to take during the landing. And let me talk about those. So there's two things we need to do during the landing phase. We need to descend and we need to slow down. So descending, obviously, we need to descend towards the runway. And ideally, we want to descend towards the start of the runway, not towards the middle, not before the runway, but to the start. So in a moment when we start descending, we really need to start looking forward, outside of the plane, not on the instruments, and see if you can kind of guess where you're going to hit the ground. Now right now I know that I'm flying level, but let's say I was descending. I'm looking forward and maybe I feel that I'm going to hit the ground at these buildings or in this lake or in this little farmland area there. So you want that point where you feel that you're going to hit the ground if you wouldn't control the plane in a different way. You want that point to be at the runway start. Basically at the numbers of the runway, but those are where the runway starts. So that is your descent point. You want to set that descent point by adjusting the power. If you're descending too quickly, so let's say the runway is at this little white patch of farmland. So if I'm going to hit these buildings, I'm descending too quickly, so I add a little bit of power, right? That is how we change the descent rate. We add some power to descend less quickly. And now if I've added too much power, I might feel that I'm going to land in this brown area on the ground. So I'm going to reduce my power so that I glide back down, descend quicker, and I'm aiming towards this patch of whiter stuff here, lighter stuff. Let's say that that's the runway. That's how I'm going to aim to the runway. And constantly during the descent towards the runway, I'm adjusting the power. Anytime I feel that I'm getting too low or descending too quick, add some power. When I feel that I'm going to overshoot the runway, descending not quickly enough, reduce the power. As we have learned in the previous couple of videos. So that is how we are going to descend. But we also need to slow down. Right now I'm flying 80 knots. But if I would land at 80 knots and I would just bounce a little bit, well, we're going so fast that the wings are producing so much lift, we will go right up in the air again. And we don't want that. I don't want to hit the ground, bounce up and fly again. That's not what I want. So we need to slow down to around 50 knots or so. Somewhere around 40 or 50 knots, just above the stall speed. 40 knots is when the plane does no longer fly. And around that speed, I want to touch down on the ground. So we also need to start slowing down. So actually, let me see where we are in relation to the airfield. So the runway starts over there. So I'm just going to fly a little bit further ahead so we have some space. So as I start ascending, I also want to think about slowing down. Initially, I'll just slow down to about 70 knots. And we can, of course, slow down by lowering the power and raising the nose. And then lowering the power enough so that we still have that correct descending point set to the start of the runway, as we have learned. But we can also set some flaps. So we haven't really talked about flaps. Flaps are basically parts of the wing right over here and also on the right side of the wing over here. These can extend down to curve more air downwards. So it actually increases the lift because that air that curved down pushes the wings up. And that will help us fly better at lower speed, so it even makes it easier to land. But it also, because we have some wing parts extending down, it blocks the air and it slows us down. So that can also help us to slow down during the descent. So once I start my initial descent towards the runway, let me make sure I'm not going to lose it. So over there. Once I'm going to start my initial descent towards the runway, I'm going to set the flaps to initially 10 degrees down. So at this notch. So we just put the flaps down one step to 10 degrees. So then we can, slow down to about 70 knots as a nice descent rate. And as I get close to the runway, I'll get the flaps to 20 degrees down and slow down to about 60 knots. And then once we get close to the runway, I'll get my throttle all the way to idle so we don't have any more power. And then I'll talk about what we do next. But let's just first talk about descending. So let's just start turning towards the runway, which is now... let's see, where is it actually? It's kind of hard to... oh, there it is. So we're far away from it enough. So let's start to turn towards it. And again, we're now just turning. So I'm using what we've talked about in the last video. And the thing that I'm focusing on right now is just going towards the airfield, but not directly. I want to be on that heading of the runway as I move towards the airfield, otherwise it'll be misaligned with the runway. So I see on my heading indicator where runway 23 is. I'm going to keep that heading directly to my right. So we actually see a little arrow here, what's directly to my right. So almost 23 here, that's over here. So I'm going to fly level here until as I'm directly aligned with the runway, so I can see the airport. So once the airport is directly to my right, then I also need to turn to the right to fly on that heading. That's how I'm going to fly towards the runway at this moment. Not descending right now, we're still far enough away from it, but once I make my turn, I'm going to think about starting my final descent and slowing down using the flaps, going to 70 knots. So a little bit longer now. And it's always good to not start their descent towards the runway too quickly, too close to the airfield if you're not comfortable with the whole landing phase. That's definitely something to practice, because you don't want to give yourself too little time to prepare. So we're getting there. This is a nice distance. And the terrain in northern Netherlands is pretty nice. All of these little river swampy bits, little lakes. Actually, just yesterday I was cycling over this path here. Yeah, this takes you right into my hometown there. It's a pretty cool place. Actually, we might be able to see the VOR. Oh, we also see a glitch in the terrain here. There's actually a VOR over here. Well, I can't see it. So let's turn towards the runway, because we're about aligned with it right now. Let's not talk about VORs. That's a subject for another video. Let's turn to the right. There we are, we see the runway ahead. So the runway is straight ahead of me. And I am perfectly aligned onto the path of the runway. So now I want to slow down and descend. So let's lower the power. Well, that will start my descent, but I also want to slow down. So we can trim, we can pitch up, but I'm actually going to first set the flaps to 10 degrees. So the flaps are moving down. And we can see them. There we go, they're pointing down a little bit. And I'm just going to see what my airspeed is doing and what my descent rate is doing. I'm not really focusing too much on descending towards exactly the start of the runway. You know, just not too much, not too little. The airspeed has dropped a little bit because of the flaps, but I also feel that I need to pitch up a little bit more myself, so I'll do that and then I'll trim to cancel that out. Ignore that flashing blue light that was there a moment ago. That's something we don't need to worry about. So I'm going to trim the nose up a little bit because I had to pull it up to maintain 70 knots. So now we're flying at 70 knots. You know, just basic stuff that we had done before. Slowing down, accelerating while descending. And I'm now looking at the runway start. I'm not going to slow down to 60 knots just yet. I mean, we're still far away from the runway. Probably about 2 minutes or so before we touch down. So just get a little bit closer. And I'm just looking at the start of the runway. And if I feel that I'm going to overshoot the runway a little bit, I'll just lower my power so that I descend more quickly. If I feel that I'm going to hit this swampy lake over there, I don't want that. I'm going to add some power so we go back towards the runway. And I'm constantly adjusting the throttle, only small amounts, very small amounts. Because it takes a couple of seconds for the plane to catch up with your throttle settings. So if you're constantly adjusting massively, you will basically outpace the plane and it will go all over the place. A little bit more power, I'm getting a little bit on the low side. Pretty good so far. So let's start to slow down to 60 knots. So I'll lower the power a little bit more and pitch the nose up. And I'm also going to set the flaps to 20 degrees. And that will be my landing flaps. There's no need to go to 30 degrees of flaps. So here's 60 knots. Adding a bit more power so we start climbing. And I'm going to trim the nose so that we are staying at 60 knots without me having to pitch up or down massively. It's a little bit bumpy here. That's usually the case when you get close to the terrain at slower speeds. So now I'm really starting to focus on the start of the runway. Make sure I'm still on the correct alignment towards the runway. And now let me talk about what's going to happen in a moment. So at some time we want to get the throttle all the way to idle because it doesn't make sense to land with still some throttle applied. So we'll go idle throttle once I'm just about to enter over the runway threshold. And that will be the moment where I feel that if I would go to idle throttle, we would still land on the runway. We wouldn't land in the grass before it. At that point I will go to the idle throttle. A little bit low here, so let me add some power. So at that point we're just gliding down to the runway with no more power. And then of course we really start to descend because we have so little power. We actually have no power. So we don't want to hit the ground very hard. So at some point we have to pull the nose up just over the horizon. So about this much. Right? So that is just over the horizon. Let me fix my airspeed because I did that. But that is what we will do. And I will keep it there. And because we have no power in the moment, every time the nose wants to drop, I'm going to pull it back up to just over the horizon. And as a result of that, we will land with our main landing gear, the 2 landing gears. We don't want to land on a nose wheel. So we will land up in a nose up attitude. So, and then we'll just keep it there, let the plane descend while in that nose up attitude. It will slow down and hopefully touch down safely. And this is really where practice makes perfect. So let's get into it. I'm going to show you what I've just mentioned. We're getting close to the runway. In a moment I go idle throttle once I feel we have made the runway even at idle throttle, which is about now. So I'll go idle throttle. Let the nose pitch down. And just before we are getting too close to the ground, I'm going to pitch the nose up. Fly level for a moment. Let the airspeed bleed off. And I'm going to flare up. Get that nose over, just over the horizon. Keep it here. Keep pulling, pulling and pulling. Just keep it there. And then we land with our main landing gear first. Gently lower the nose by releasing the pressure on the yoke. And then we just roll out. That was actually a very good landing. I'm happy with that. Don't feel too bad if it doesn't go well for you right now. If you have a hard landing or whatever. It's a simulator. It's there for practicing. And practicing really makes that last phase of the flight, that transition from a nose down attitude and then to idle throttle and then flaring up. That transition is the most difficult part of flying. So feel free to try it however long you need. There we go. So then once we're on the ground, we just let the plane roll out until I see a taxiway. I'm going to gently start braking a little bit. And I'm going to increase my flaps because we no longer need them. So I'm just going to exit the runway here. and then I'm going to taxi back towards the parking spot. We can do it in the next video, but actually let's do it in this one video, because in the next video I would otherwise just be taxiing and shutting the plane down, which is really simple, so there's no need to dedicate a whole video on that. So we'll leave the runway here, and as we leave the runway I'm going to turn my landing lights and the strobe lights back off, which we had turned on for the takeoff. So landing lights, strobe lights off, the beacon light stays on. Some other lights are required for nighttime, but you know, we're not really worried about the lights too much right now. So I'm just going to taxi back here. So let's talk about something during this taxi back. I have had an idea for a while. This actually has nothing to do with the tutorial, so feel free to skip to the end as I'm parked. But I have an idea that I want to post on, towards you. My channel is all about learning to fly in a realistic manner. And in Explain, my previous set of videos, I have really, went into a lot of detail about how the planes work, how they are flying. And I kind of want to step it up to the next level with that kind of video material. I want to make a full video course, very professionally made, nicely edited, fully complete. So not like, videos just stopping at some point, which is what has happened on my channel. Let's just go in the taxiway here back to the terminal. I want to make a full video course. I want to set aside some time in the near future to make that. And if I'm going to do that, that will take quite a lot of time. So I'm probably going to ask some money for it. Maybe about $20 or $30, somewhere around that range. I'm not sure yet what the course is going to look like, but I want to make a video course. So let me know if you guys are interested in something like that. Just a fully complete course with basically all of the material that you would get for your private pilot license, but then applied for simulators. So of course it's not the same thing, definitely not. I will have to make all kinds of disclaimers because I'm not a flight instructor. But I want to make tutorials or video lessons in a big course. Probably going to put it on something like Udemy, ask a little bit of money for it, and you will get a full course of learning to fly as if it were for your private pilot license, basically, in a simulator. So let me know if you guys are interested in something like that. I would definitely have been interested in that myself when I was learning all of this. So yeah, let me know what you think. And I'm not sure what kind of format it's going to take, but I just want to get some input from you guys. If you have any suggestions about something like that, feel free to let me know in the comments. But yeah, that's just an idea that I've had, and maybe I'll start doing that in the near future. So I'm going to turn left the next taxiway, which was the same taxiway we took off or started at in the first video. And we'll turn left, and then we will park the plane. And then I'm going to park the plane, and then we're going to stop the engine and shut the plane down, which is actually very simple. So let's just park next to one of those fuel stations again. It's not really a normal parking spot for this plane actually, but it'll be fine. We can park wherever I want. For realism's sake, I'm just parking over here. We can even just park in the grass if we want. I mean, it's a simulator, who cares? I'm just going to park on the right here next to this building. Make sure we're not going to hit our wings against it, so we'll just turn left here. And we'll brake, come to a stop, and set the parking brake. And initially I'll get my throttle back to 1000. As a habit, always get your throttle to 1000 as you're stationary on the ground, otherwise the engine cools down too much. And that is bad for the engine. So next thing, to shut the plane down, you don't actually rotate the key to off. That will actually turn off the ignition and that will shut the engine down. But we actually first want to get rid of all of the fuel that goes to the engine. So first throttle to idle, and then we just pull the mixture out. So we're not mixing any more fuel into the airflow mixture. And as you can see, the RPM just drops all the way down. The engine is now stopped. And there we go. So once the propeller is stopped, then we'll turn the ignition off so that no more fuel, all of the fuel that has been ignited and is gone. And then we can turn the alternator off, the battery off, and we can close the fuel shut-off valve. So no more fuel can go to the engine. And there's the plane shut down again. As simple as that. So close the mixture, wait for the propeller to stop spinning, ignition off, battery off, and then the fuel shut-off valve closed. Alright guys, that is it. That is how we land the plane, taxi back and shut down. And that's also the end of this basics tutorial. Let me know what you thought about it. Let me also know what you thought about that idea that I just posted about. I'm making a video course. Yeah, yeah, if I ever make the video course, I will probably post in the description down below a link to it, so you can actually look at it right now. But if it's not done yet, or if I'm not going to do it anyway, I probably will. It will not be there, so you can look in the description whether or not I've made it already if you're watching this video in the future. But let me know what you think about that idea. Yeah, any suggestions for more tutorials, let them come. I'm going to make some more tutorials on my channel. That's something I definitely want to mention. I'm not going to stop making videos on my channel because I'm making that big course. I'm definitely going to make, tutorials like the ones I've made today, or tutorials about some more specific things like the G1000 avionics package, or how to fly an ILS approach, all kinds of things like that. Navigation, using charts, so all kinds of cool things to learn. And I'll definitely keep making videos on my channel like that. But I feel that there's a need for just a nice organized video course about just the whole picture. Alright guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in whatever video is coming next.